Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Hello and welcome to Stage 9, Trek FM show about the people who make Star Trek. I'm Mike.
I'm John.
And today we have a very special guest joining us, Robert Hewitt Wolfe, the writer of many, many great episodes of Deep Space Nine. He has a new book out called The Goblin Crown, and we're going to talk to him about it in a little bit. But first, obviously, there's some pretty big breaking news in terms of Star Trek Discovery, and that is the casting of one of the captains of the new series, Michelle Yeoh.
Yes, Michelle Yeoh, who is a well-known actress across the globe.
Yeah, she got her start doing some, I guess, they're like kung fu movies, right? I mean, I'm trying to think of like the first movie that I saw her in. I want to say it was some like, Jackie Chan movie from like the mid to late 90s, because my friend Matt was a huge fan of, Jackie Chan and by extension Michelle Yeoh. So he was always like, check out this movie, check out this person. And, so I was certainly aware of her. But the first movie I think that made a really big impact on me was Tomorrow Never Dies.
Well, who can forget seeing Tomorrow Never Dies, Mike? Who can ever forget that masterpiece of Bond filmmaking that came out in the 90s?
You say that sarcastically, but I just told you
Am I
this.
that transparent?
I just told you this off air, but Tomorrow Never Dies is my favorite non-Daniel Craig Bond movie.
Heresy.
I mean, you know how they always say like your first Bond is your favorite, that kind of thing. I mean, technically Goldfinger is the first Bond movie that I saw, but GoldenEye was the first one that I saw in the theater, and it kind of like that's what made me fall in love with Bond. And while I enjoyed GoldenEye quite a bit, when I saw Tomorrow Never Dies, I'm like, this one clicks. This one it checks all of the boxes, and it really is very entertaining. It's got that gorgeous Robert Elswit photography. One of 3 movies on my 1997 top 10 to be shot by Robert Elswit, by the way. And, I mean, just everything about it was cool. And one of the coolest things about it was Michelle Yeoh.
I take nothing away from her, and the thing is, Tomorrow Never Dies. I don't, by no means, do not take my commentary to be that it's equal in contempt to Die Another Day or
another movie that I like, by the way.
What? No, you don't.
I do.
That's not possible. No, not Die.
This is my analogy for Die Another Day. Die Another Day is the Jordan Dub Zero of James Bond movies.
I have no idea what that means.
I know. But if there are any sneakerheads out there, they'll be like, "Yeah, you're totally right."
Oh, that absolutely not a chance. But anyway, Michelle Yeoh in Tomorrow Never Dies was really good for me. I think, like so many other people, the movie that really made the biggest impression was Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I mean, that movie. I remember that. I had hair back then, so it actually blew my hair back when I watched it.
Yeah, I just watched it again today, as a matter of fact, and I saw it, like when it first came out, everyone's like, oh my God, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. So I saw it opening night with my friend Matt, who I was talking about, and, I think maybe part of it was like the hype, but I, watched it and was kind of like, yeah, that's a good movie. I mean, I never thought it was a bad movie, but it did not blow me away like, it did everyone else. And I've seen it a few times since then, and watching it today still didn't blow me away. I'm not a huge fan of the story so much, but I do have to say that the fight scenes were extremely well done extremely well choreographed, and I think I appreciated those a lot more this time than I did the first time. And one of the things that really stuck out to me really was the direction and the camera work, not just like the fighting itself, but also like really, really good, performances as well. I mean, the three leads were all pretty awesome in that, Chow Yun-fat and Zhang Zi and Michelle Yeoh. But yeah, Yeoh was great in that movie, and that is definitely, I think, the one that sort of like shot her into, superstardom internationally in a sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. I mean, what's interesting is that I don't think she's had anything that's made as much of an impact as Crouching Tiger, but I do know that she was, and I haven't seen it, but I know she was in Sunshine, which is something of a cult hit.
Yeah,
sci-fi cult hit, right?
Yeah, Sunshine's not a bad movie. It was directed by Danny Boyle. It was written by Alex Garland, who wrote and directed Ex Machina and everything. And it's kind of a, it really does feel like sort of a 2001 type of, Solaris type of sci-fi movie, and it works pretty well, I have to say.
So, what do you think her casting portends for the rest of what we're going to discover about the new Star Trek series? Like, in your mind, a casting announcement can set the tone for a series, for how you're going to, react to the news that's coming. Does this set you up for, more excitement hearing her name put out there? Or is this something where you say, okay, that's an interesting choice, let's see what the rest of the crew is like?
This is my guess as to what this means. Because one of the things which is interesting about it is, she's definitely not the main character. She's the captain of another ship, right? So that says two things to me. In terms of the casting, what it says is, especially since they apparently still don't have the lead cast, and they're apparently looking for like someone new, someone who's not a superstar or anything like that. I see this as being sort of a I gotta invoke Soderbergh, right? A haywire scenario.
Okay, I thought we were going to make it 1 week without. I appreciate that.
No. Sorry. Where you have like someone at the lead who is not necessarily established, is not a big star, but perhaps you're going to surround her with a bunch of stars.
You know what? I'll bring it to a Star Wars analogy, because Peter Cushing was a known Hammer Films horror star. Sir Alec Guinness is a known actor,
right? And
they're acting in support of these three actors that nobody knew who Mark Hamill was.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, and the fact that she's the captain of another ship. I mean, like in that first trailer, they were like, new missions, new crews, and everyone's like, crews? Like plural? Yeah. Like, what does that mean, And then you start hearing things come out, rumors about like there's going to be like a couple admirals are going to be leads in the show and a couple captains, and it's like, what is going on? Like, what? This is not your typical, Star Trek, mission on a ship, or maybe it is. I mean, who knows? But this, to me, I mean, if they're casting Michelle Yeoh in like a supporting role where she's not even the captain of Discovery, she's the captain of another ship. It's like, how big is the scope of this series going to be? You know?
This might sound silly. It really might sound silly, but do we even have a scale for Discovery? Maybe she's a captain of a ship that Discovery is carrying.
Who knows?
We don't know how big that ship is.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, early word, they say this plays a prominent role in season 1. I'm wondering if maybe this is central to the story that they're telling in season 1, but maybe Michelle Yeoh is I'll do a season of Star Trek, but I'm not coming back for season 2 or whatever. Or maybe it is something where she's not going to be in every episode,
Right.
I mean, who knows? But it's exciting nonetheless, right?
This sounds terrible because every actor or actress in Hollywood has talent and is trying their best. But when you hear a name, put out, like Michelle Yeoh is a name. She's not a superstar per se, but she's a name where you can say, okay, they're casting people. They obviously have an eye toward somebody that has an established body of work, that has a talent that I've seen demonstrated before. For me, that's sort of how I come to it. Is, this is a person whose body of work I'm familiar with, at least, and I know that they're going to do a good job with whatever is given to them.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, the other interesting thing, they keep on talking about, trying to make this show more diverse and everything like that. And here you've got, a woman who's, not American, she's Asian, and she's older too, which is cool because, obviously the tendency with television is to get younger and younger and younger. And here, the lead is going to be someone who's, not even a captain, suggesting that she'll be younger. So it's cool that, they're already, sort of leaning in that direction.
Right. They're not casting everybody in the same age pool.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is good. So yeah, I'm excited. And Nicholas Meyer, I mean, God bless him, I mean, the fact that, he let this slip in like an interview about, the Time After Time Blu-ray release, from Warner Archive, which, by the way, go out and get Time After Time on Blu-ray because that movie's awesome. If you like Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, you'll love Time After Time. But yeah, I just love that. I just love how, because Nicholas Meyer, he's not like precious about any, like us as fans, we're like, Star Trek Discovery, new casting announcement, where he's like, what's the deal? I mean, it's like, I'm sure you have a new coworker, and if someone were to ask you if you worked with her, you'd be like, yeah, what's the big deal, guys?
Did his dog tweet out afterward about
his dog? The first tweet from his dog was "Meow!" exclamation point. So like replacing the Y with an M. But then his dog also tweeted, "Today," this is on Thanksgiving, right? "Today I'm thankful to live with such a great dad, even if he did let the cat out of the bag, Ray Michelle. You'll love what's coming next." And then there's a picture of a dog dressed like a Native American and a cat dressed like a pilgrim with their arms around each other. So
I love his sense of humor, man. I really do.
I don't think it's him who's doing it. I think it's got to be like his daughter or something, Well,
then I love her sense of humor. Whoever sense of humor it is that's running that account, they have got it in spades, man.
Yes, it is the best account on Twitter. It's at Star Trek Dog for anyone who wants to follow along, see what's going on behind the scenes on Disco from Nicholas Meyer's dog's perspective, which is great.
I still say the best one is asking about what you should do if somebody ate the blueprints for the new bridge, asking for a friend.
Yeah, that's good. Oh, well, all right. So that takes care of that. What do you say we get into our feature for today?
Let's do it.
Our guest today has written some of the very best episodes of Star Trek, including Past Tense, Homefront, and Call to Arms. His new book, The Goblin Crown, is available now on Amazon, Audible, and all the rest of it. Robert Hewitt Wolfe, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
So, for people who haven't read The Goblin Crown, can you give us like a brief description of it?
Yeah, The Goblin Crown is a fantasy YA book. It's for, readers probably 11 to 16 or so, but I think it's obviously grown-ups can enjoy it too. It's about 3 modern American teenagers who on their first day of high school are mysteriously transported to another world, a fantasy world, with all kinds of monsters and magic. But they're rescued by the bad guys in this world. They're rescued by goblins. And the goblins have a prophecy that whenever they are in trouble, a human child will appear and become their king and save them. And they are currently in a whole heck of a lot of trouble because they've just lost the great war against the humans. And the humans have decided, in this world, that they've had enough of the goblins and they're coming to exterminate them all. So the goblins, one of the goblins in particular, a goblin named Hop, looks to these 3 newly arrived human kids and hopes that one of them is his king and will protect them from the oncoming human horde. And the kids are modern American kids. So the main character, Billy Smith, is mixed race. He's moved around his whole life. He's just arrived in San Francisco, so he's never really fit in. The next character, another point of view character, is Lexi, and she is the girl he sort of gets a crush on the first day of high school. And she's Philippine American, and she's grown up in San Francisco. And it turns out when she arrives in this world, she can work magic, which is not great because she has some ADHD, hyperactivity, impulse control issues, and if you have those and you can blow things up with your mind, that's a bad combination. And the last of the three is Kurt, and he is the high school quarterback and the obvious candidate for king.
Yeah, a little while ago I was asking someone, like, what exactly does YA mean? And, they described it to me, and I'm like, I still don't understand. I mean, I guess because it totally works. I mean, I'm in my 30s, and I enjoyed it quite a bit, and I know John.
And I'm in my 40s, and I got a big kick out of it. I can't wait to pass it along to my daughter for her to read, and we can talk about it.
Terrific. That's what I want to hear. I mean, I wrote it for myself as much as for anyone, and I'm older than both of you. But I also wrote it for my nephews and my friends' kids. I think that the definition of YA is just that the protagonists tend to be young and identifiable to younger readers, but I don't think that should limit them in their audience particularly. And I think, I love the Mockingjay books. I think they're great. I read all the Harry Potters, and there's a lot of great YA fiction that really does cross over. So that's my hope with this as well, that the kids of all ages will enjoy it.
Was it a type of thing where you set out to write like a young adult book, or did you like start coming up with this story, and once you realized that the protagonists were teenagers and stuff like that, you sort of shifted it in that direction?
It's more the second. I had the idea for the story. I know the business, and I know how it works, and I know if I were to sit down and write that as a feature film spec script, that it's three young protagonists. They're multi-ethnic. They're the only humans in the entire story. Everything else is goblins that would have to be done by CG or whatever. So, or prosthetics. That's a daunting prospect as a feature script, and I didn't want it to just sit on the shelf, to go out as a sample. And I've sold a bunch of features, none of them got made. It's a little frustrating. So I decided I'd write it as a novel and hope that it would find its audience that way.
So given that you did, decide to make it a novel, if this were to take off and be picked up, what visual medium do you think this lends itself to best? Is this something where you would see it as possibly a limited series on, say, a Netflix service, or would you view this as more of a feature film territory?
I think there's really two ways to go with this. One way would be to do sort of the Lord of the Rings, Hobbit type, big fantasy films. There's going to be 3 books. You could do 3 movies, have the kids be played by real actors, have the goblins be rendered by, CG, photorealistic, Smeagol-esque characters. And then the other way to go, I think, would be to do, if you're going to do it on TV, I think you could do a really nice job of doing it in sort of the fashion of Avatar: The Last Airbender, where you could tell like the whole story, the first book and the first season, maybe find some more fun incidents along the way, tell it over like 20 or so half hours, and then do each book that way for 3 seasons. That would be my preference, but honestly, if someone came to me with a different plan and they were excited about it, I'd certainly entertain anything.
I mean, since you come from the world of television and everything, I mean, that's a much more collaborative writing process than writing a novel, it seems. Did you find that to be challenging, not to have like other writers to bounce ideas off of on a daily basis or that sort of thing?
It was a little tricky in some ways. Yeah, because I am used to working in a writer's room, bouncing ideas off of other writers all the time. So I leaned a little more on my wife, who's a writer as well. And then I also gave out the initial drafts to a ton of beta readers just to get a lot of feedback to make sure I was making sense, telling a story that was coherent and that they were enjoying. And I got some really great feedback. I had a friend of mine who who's a gifted junior high and like fifth, sixth, seventh grades. I think she taught gifted kids, and she gave it to a class and made me some amazing notes. Great feedback. So.
Oh, excellent.
Cool. Yeah. So, as far as the story is concerned, I mean, here you've had to sort of like build this entire, mythology, from scratch essentially, and then you're telling a story inside of it. When you were originally like sort of like coming up with the concept, did you sort of see the world first and then find a story to tell inside of that world, or did you build the world around the story that you wanted to tell?
I built the world around the story I wanted to tell. So yeah. I really wanted to tell sort of this story about these three modern kids entering this world and really interacting with the villains, ostensible villains of this world, and seeing what their lives are like. So I knew it was goblins. I knew it was these three modern kids. And then around that, I had to build the world that made sense for the goblins to live in, and make up the rules of how magic worked, and the geopolitical situation, the language, the culture, all of that stuff came in service of the story. But, in a way, sort of, when you do world creation, what you hope is that it takes on a life of its own, and sometimes it's even bigger than the story. So what the hope is to do some world building that could support any number of stories and feels like a larger world that this particular story is taking place in. So I hope I accomplished that it feels like the world is bigger than the story, but the story comes first.
Well, I can tell you that I think you were definitely successful with the world building. And one of the things that fascinates me, and you mentioned language, is when you were writing the dialogue, the goblin language, the vernacular that persists through things. Did you write that in as you were going along, or was that something where you went back and put it back on when you heard a neat word? And are there sort of purposeful call outs or inside jokes that you've worked in with some of those goblin words that make their way through the dialogue?
I definitely try to have fun with it. What I did was I kind of created a goblin speech pattern, and honestly, in the earlier drafts, it was even thicker. It was a lot more. The dialogue was even more extreme and more pronounced, but it was hard to read. It got I don't know whether you've ever read the book Ridley Walker, but it was a little bit like, oh my God, I'm having to puzzle my way through these sentences. So I pulled it back a lot, but by creating this very distinctive speech pattern and these language rules, it really helped me kind of create their voices. And then as far as the individual words that I kept, they don't really have, and there's not very many inside jokes. They're probably influenced by the languages I learned. I don't speak any of them fluently anymore, but I used to speak German fluently. I spoke Swedish fluently. I spoke Latin. I learned Latin. I don't know if I ever spoke Latin. I even know a little Italian and Spanish. And so there's obviously, those are probably the languages most influenced by. The undeclined verbs is Swedish. In modern Swedish, all the verbs are identical. They don't change based on person, like second, third person, plural. They don't change at all. So I think that was clearly influenced by Swedish. And then other than that, I just try to come up with lots of fun sounding words that would be exciting to learn and remember, and easy to remember, like wazer, or aka, which are just goblin, not expletives.
It seems like you really did find a good balance, because like with a lot of, sort of like fantasy books and stuff like that, you really do kind of get bogged down in the language, and it, like you're saying, it becomes hard to read, and it almost feels like a little pretentious. And this book really felt like it felt more grounded in, like, I guess, our reality in a sense. Like even the goblin stuff, it was like more relatable, and it was more fun, I think, and like less pretentious than a lot of fantasy books. But it worked really well.
Thank you. That was the idea. I mean, I wanted the goblin language to be fun. That was really what I was going for, because I just felt like part of what I'm trying to do with the story was, I've always sort of hated those scenes in movies and books, even though it can be exciting when all kind of bad guys just sort of pour into the room and they just get slaughtered. I've always wondered, like, what was that guy's story? Why was he in that room? And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the goblins, is like, they're fun. They have a fascinating culture. I mean, occasionally they threaten to eat people, but I tried to make their culture as lively and interesting and diverse as possible. I didn't want just one goblin. You know how sometimes it's like every goblin is the same goblin. I wanted to make them distinguishable from each other, have a rich culture. That's why the words, that's also why the songs are in the book as well, to try to give a little bit of feeling for the culture.
You know, I want to tip my hat on that point, because that was something I was talking about with somebody, was what makes this goblin world feel so real and so vibrant is the fact that you get very used to in fantasy stuff, when you encounter something like a goblin, all goblins look and act and behave the same way, whereas you do have a real variance in their culture. And given that was a decided effort on your part, was that part of the journey of finding the voice of the goblins, was finding their varying looks? Did that help bring more substance to them as you were creating them?
I think so. And I think that's a place where writing for Star Trek was incredibly helpful. So we were very conscious of that when we were writing Deep Space Nine. We had many Ferengi, and they were all quite different. Nog and Rom and Brunt and Quark and the Grand Nagus and Moogie. They all had very different voices, very different worldviews. They were all characters in their own right, but they all fit into that culture. You understood that they were all products of the same culture, but they were all very different people with very different ideas about whether they identify with it, how much do they identify with the culture and agree with it. And the same with Klingons. We wrote all kinds of different Klingons. We had one board that we used over and over again. But the idea is that we wanted to sort of show that these were people that came from a culture, not all just sort of identical clones of each other, except for the Borda, who was an identical clone of himself. But yeah, so I think that I brought that same idea to the Goblins, and I created them the way I would create any character. I thought about what their worldview was, what their instincts were, what their hopes and dreams were, also physically what they looked like, and how that would reflect who they were or not. So some characters, their outward appearance is very indicative of who they are in some ways. Like Hop is very much characterized by how he looks. He has a mangled ear. He's been through a whole heck of a lot. He's very wary, and he's a guy who's been hurt and doesn't want to be hurt again. But Leadpipe is a giant, and he's actually quite gentle and kind most of the time, except when he gets ticked off when he's protecting his brother or his friends. So it's that kind of thing. You just want to create as many kind of interesting characters as you can.
The cultural thing is interesting because there's a lot of like interesting thematic stuff going on in this book, and it's something that I think we see in your work in Deep Space Nine as well. It's something that we always talk about, where Deep Space Nine kind of constantly was almost like predicting like where society was going, in terms of the stories that you guys were telling, like with past tense and Homefront and those types of things. And here in Goblin Crown, I kind of see the same thing going on, where you've got like this kid who's sort of like caught between two cultures, both in our world and in the Goblin world, and like he's the one who's trying to unite everyone together in a sense. And I'm wondering if that was like a conscious decision on your part to sort of like have like a social commentary there.
I would say absolutely. I think Star Trek is socially conscious as a franchise. It's always informed by trying to grapple with these kind of social issues, trying to tell a story that has a point. I certainly both enjoyed that from the outside before I came in, and then that was my graduate school. That was the world I was raised in as a writer. So it's always been important to me to try to tell stories that have some significance, that are more than just stories, that are a little richer than that. And I thought that, again, I think the impetus from the very beginning of this was, like I said, to tell a story about modern American kids in a situation that we've seen a lot of characters in, but very rarely that. Very rarely the kids that I see walking around in Los Angeles or California or New York or even in Shreveport and other places I've been, I wanted a story that sort of spoke to them. I also was, your prototypical hero is someone who's caught in the middle of two worlds. That's just sort of one of the definitions of a hero. And so I wanted a lot of things about Billy to reflect that, including his ethnic background, his backstory. And then ultimately, he's caught in the middle of these worlds between human and goblin, between our world and this world, between who he is and who he aspires to be. It's that very archetypal thing. But yeah, the social stuff was really important to me. I think, like I said before, I've never loved those scenes where like lots of NDs are just murdered and they don't have much of a story and no one seems to feel very bad for them. And I think we're in a place in our culture where there's a significant amount of sort of villainizing the enemy. And look, there's bad people out there who are doing bad things. But I think that as a writer, empathy is incredibly important. And I think empathy is a way you can understand where other people are coming from. And sometimes that means that's necessary to stop them from doing bad things, but also sometimes it's important to just understand the greater situation, to maybe look at a bigger solution that isn't just about killing as many people as you can, And I think I felt like this was a type of story that needed to be told right now, given where we're at as a society, as a culture.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, your day job is writing and producing Elementary, and you were doing this simultaneously, from what it sounds like. Did you have how hard was it to sort of shift gears between the two? How did you balance those two things? From a practical standpoint, I guess.
Well, the good thing for me was when I wrote the bulk of Goblin Crown, I was not working on Elementary. I wrote most of it before I started Elementary, and then the process of selling the book and doing the final revisions, I was on Elementary, so it was easy enough to find time to do revisions and get some time in the evening or in the morning and do the revisions I had to do and get the final 3 or 4 drafts that had to be done to get it from where it was to publish. But I sold 3 books, so I have to write 2 more, and now I am fully committed to both Elementary and to getting these done. So that means that it's a lot of writing in the evenings. Elementary has to come first. That's my day job. That's my main responsibility as a writer. So I do all the Elementary work first, and then, especially when I'm not on script, luckily there's usually some extra time when I can spend some time writing the sequel. I'm like halfway through the next book, The Fallen Star, and it's a lot of fun. But it is a little bit more challenging to find the time between things that I'm doing on Elementary.
I can imagine. Yeah. So you said, okay, so there's going to be 3 books, because that was one of my questions, was whether or not how far this was going to go. But 3 books, and the next one is theoretically coming out next year?
Around this time next year-ish, if I get it done. To be honest, my day job is making the progress a little slower than I'd like, but it should certainly be out in the next year or so. But it's not going to be George R.R. Martin 5 years from now. That won't happen. Luckily, but mostly because these are shorter books. I'm looking at between 90 and 100,000 words for the first draft. So that's a tenth the size of one of Martin's books. So the fact that he gets one out every 5 years, I'm now in awe of that. that he gets them out at all, given how big they are. Because it's tough. Writing just 90,000 words is tough.
Sure. Yeah, and in addition to 24 hours of television or whatever it is, I mean Yeah, we do 24 a year, and I personally have written 3 or 4 a year, and then other duties too. So yeah, there's a lot of time management challenges to be sure. Yeah, well, I mean it's definitely worth it. I mean this book was really entertaining, and I'm definitely looking forward to the next one. Thank you. I mean, I really enjoyed writing it. I'm very much enjoying the sequel. Writing the sequel as well, and there's a couple new. There's one point of view character in the first book that obviously is not in the second book. So there's a couple new
point of view characters in the second book that I'm really enjoying writing as well as the returning favorites. So and lots of fun adventures and obviously, if you read the first book, a little spoiler, it's a little bit of a cliffhanger. I mean, I hope there's a satisfying end to the story that's told in the first book, but the overall story is definitely not done. And so things get even, a little grimmer in some ways for our characters. Their backs are really up against the wall in the second book, and it's always fun to write characters in that situation.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely did have a satisfying ending, but it definitely, sort of leaves you thinking about what's coming next, but it ended for sure. I mean, it worked really well. So that, it was good. And yeah, I am definitely really looking forward to the second one.
Yeah, as am I. Absolutely.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we'd love to have you back anytime.
All right. Take care, guys.
Well, that was a lot of fun talking to Robert about the Goblin Crown. Like I was saying, in the interview, I'm kind of new to the young adult scene, and I don't really know what to make of it. But, like someone was explaining, like, this is a young adult Star Wars book. And I'm like, what's young adult? And they're like, well, it's this. And I'm like, you just described Star Wars, so Star Wars, what I don't, so yeah, I mean, it's not, even though this is geared towards, like he was saying, like 11 to 16-year-olds, somewhere in that age bracket, by no means should you think that is limited to that age bracket. I found it to be quite enjoyable.
Yeah, I think it's delightful. I don't recommend books lightly. I really don't. And I think that this is very much worth the effort to go out and either listen to it on Audible or, just read it. Just buy it on your Kindle or whatever and read it.
I'm really looking forward to hearing what your daughter has to say about it, honestly.
So am I.
Yeah.
So am I. She has some really astute observations sometimes.
Yeah. It should be interesting. And, Robert, I mean, for those people who don't know, he's written all your favorite episodes of Deep Space Nine. It was kind of crazy. Like, I was talking to my wife about this, and I'm like, I'm gonna get to talk to Robert Hewitt Wolfe, and she's like, what's he done? And I start going through the list, and she's like, what? The one that really stood out to her was Little Green Men. He wrote the one where the
love that one.
She's like, that's the best episode. And Elementary. It's the only show that my parents watch on TV,
No kidding.
One year I got because they're like really big fans of Sherlock Holmes and mysteries and all that stuff. So like one year for Christmas, I got them season 1. I'm like, here, check out this show. You'll like it. And I've done that numerous times, and I go back to their house and I find the thing still shrink wrapped. And I go back there like a week later and I see that it's open, and I'm like, oh, you're watching Elementary? And they're like, yeah, we finished it. And I'm like, oh, that's cool, good, So the next year, I bought them season 2 for Christmas, and I gave it to them, and they're like, oh, great, yeah, and they finished it right away. And then I think it was last year, season 3 came out, and I got them something else for Christmas, and like, after we open up our presents and everything, they're like, so are they still making that show Elementary? And I'm like, yeah, I think so. Why? And they're like, oh, well, we just thought that, you're going to get us like season 3. And I'm like, fine, So I got it for them, and they watched it and they loved it. So yeah, my entire family is Robert Hewitt Wolfe fans. So such a great writer and a great guy to talk to.
Agreed.
All right, well, it's been fun talking about the Goblin Crown today, but that's not all we're talking about here on Trek FM this week. So here's a look at what you may have missed elsewhere on the network.
Previously on Trek.fm, Standard Orbit.
Don't watch any of the extras on the first disc because they're all duplicated over the second disc. So then that way you can just watch them in order and not have to worry about, oh, well, let me skip this one because I watched it on the first disc and do all that.
Wait, to clarify, they have all the special features in column A on one disc, and then all the special features of column A plus column B on a second disc?
That is correct.
That makes no sense to me at all.
I know, I was very confused when I sat down to watch it.
Melodic Treks.
Matter? I bury nowhere. Oh, it's painful. I don't know. You snowing me? You snowing me?
Painful's just saying remiss and blah, blah. I felt myself falling asleep. I felt like it was my parents were telling me a good night story where you were giving me that track listings there that Like,
Does it still McFly?
That's one of my favorite ones.
Stage 9, a podcast about the people who make Star Trek.
Within about 15 seconds, you texted me back, Dr. Giggles, we have to do Dr. Giggles. And my question for you is,
yes,
why did we absolutely have to do Dr. Giggles?
Saturday Morning Trek.
And all these things just brought in more and more people who thought they were alone, and they found each other, and they made their clubs, and then they made conventions, and that's what the 70s were about, was getting Star Trek back and finding each other.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out these shows and find out what we're talking about in your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Windows Phone, our website, whatever. Just check it out. If you do go to iTunes, please subscribe to our show, and please leave us a review and a rating, and that would be very much appreciated because that helps other people find the show when they're looking for it. We'd like to thank our associate producers, Jeff Sutter, Chris Stenftenagel, and Norman C. Lau, for helping us out. If you want to be like Jeff, Chris, and Norm, head on over to patreon.com/TrekFM and become a patron of the network. You can find all of our current goals and different milestone contribution levels over there, along with all the great perks we have for you, including early access to content, exclusive content, producer credits, and more. Just head on over to patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM, and we really appreciate your support. If you want to contact us, you can find the network on Twitter at TrekFM. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. And you can find us on the Babel Conference, which is our listener forum, which is also on Facebook. Just type the Babel Conference into the search field on Facebook, and we'll let you in. John, where can people find you on the internet?
Look for Kessel Junkie. That's where I'm at. You can also find me co-hosting Words with Nerds with my pal Craig. You can find me co-hosting Aggressive Negotiations with Matt Rushing over on the Nerd Party Network. And speaking of the Nerd Party Network, you can also find me over on Great Shot Kid with a cantankerous film format buff named Mike. Would you know anything about that, Mike?
Yeah, it's basically the exact same thing as this show, only we talk about Star Wars instead of Star Trek.
Yes.
Yes, it's quite fun over there. This week, we are continuing our two-part series on film formats. Last week, we talked about the shooting formats of the Star Wars movies, and tomorrow, we'll be talking about the presentation formats of the Star Wars movies. It's not nearly as dry as it sounds, or maybe it is. Maybe we're just weird.
You've never heard anybody get as animated about film formats as the two of us.
It's really freaking important.
It is, actually.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Where else can they find you?
You can find me right here on Trek FM, producing From There to Here, which is our daily rewatch of all 729 episodes of Star Trek. We've only got a month left. The end is in sight. I can see that finish line.
That's the most hopeful I've heard you sound in about 11 months, Mike.
It's going to be amazing, like being able to, sleep again. Because I've substituted sleep with editing and publishing.
Why do I have a feeling that on the last episode we're just going to hear you smashing your editing equipment? Like Pete Townsend.
All I can think of is that scene at the end of Almost Famous, where the kid,
no spoilers.
You haven't seen Almost Famous? Oh my God, that's so terrible. Anyway, you need to watch Almost Famous. How can you have not seen Almost Famous? It's ridiculous.
Somebody bought it for me. I still haven't watched. You know what the problem is? Is I tried to coordinate watching it with my wife, who hadn't seen it in a while. And she got sleepy, and she said, "Oh, well, I'll watch the rest of it, with you tomorrow night." And a year later, that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna when I get my Christmas break, I'm actually gonna watch it. Promise.
Excellent. You've got the untitled bootleg director's cut?
I do indeed.
Okay.
That was what was given to me.
All right. Good. Anyway, I'll tell you what I think is going to happen after you see the end of that movie. Okay. And you can also find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K. All right. Well, we are off next week. We are taking our scheduled break, but we will be back the following week, and we're going to be talking about Michelle Yeoh in that Roger Spottiswoode masterpiece, which I say without any sense of sarcasm, Tomorrow Never Dies.